right. So, Krishnan, you know that XPM is a specialist in transition management,
Yes.
and that by transition management we mean management of projects, crises, and discontinuities where we parachute in interim managers. Uh, you may recall that it was started 20 years ago in Paris. About 8 years ago in India, we have 9 active partners in Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore. We're also active in the Middle East, and we're part of something larger called the Will Group. So we have affiliates in the UK, all throughout Europe and Asia mostly. In terms of industries, we've been involved in the steel, engineering, chemicals, IT, pharma. Not so much in FMCG, where you have a lot of experience. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. We've also been involved in a number of turnarounds, expansions, performance improvement, closure of facilities, so all kinds of transformations we've been involved in. And in terms of our style, we're very entrepreneurial, but we collaborate a lot with each other. So that's XPM in a nutshell. And I'll now ask Amal to introduce you.
Thanks,
Yeah, hi, Krishnan.
Hi,
it's a pleasure to have you in this forum, you know. So,
thanks, Amal.
Yeah, so you see, Krishnan and I have worked together in Eicher in different times. A crucible for HR transformation, you know, it cannot be bigger than that as such in the country today, you know. That's for it, and that is where, you know, and I was very much intrigued that how an engineer like you know, and very early enough, you thought that you would make your career in HR because you are an engineer by, you know, qualification. And also what I find is after that you have done your FMS MBA and did a lot of leadership programs out of Kellogg, and also your digital transformation from Darden Business School and BCG. You see, that's the type of thing which you have done. And while you have worked for engineering companies, but you have worked in one of the world-class training organizations in the sense that Xerox training is worldwide, you know, the way in which you have worked, engineering organizations like Whirlpool, and of course, Dabur, you know. So this is the expanse of your experience, but very specifically, you have dealt more on driving transformational excellence through strategic business partnership. The talent strategy and leadership development, important elements of culture building and employer branding. And one can see that in Dabur, you know, now, how it was very difficult to attract some of the best FMCG talent to come in and work as such. But that entire, you know, thing went 180 degrees. And of course, the digital, you know, HR and IT enablement, the M&A, business and cultural integration, which has happened in your organization, your last organization. These are some of the areas in which you have worked. We look forward to you taking us through the way in which you have, you know, steered your career and also added value to organizations through your projects as such. So over to you, Krishnan.
Thanks, Amal. I think thanks for that very comprehensive perspective and makes my life a bit easier. Thanks for the generous comments that you made. I'm sharing my screen. Is it visible to everyone?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thanks, Amal. Thanks, Ranjit, for this opportunity, and matter of privilege to be talking to the people in the forum. So what I put together here is, you know, I ran the HR function as a CHRO for 6 years with Dabur. And before that, I was associated with, as Amal said, with Eicher, where we had a common connect, and then Xerox, and then Whirlpool. So these are some of my perspectives of what it takes to run HR leadership. It builds on some of my experiences of having handled certain challenging areas, my responses to those areas, leading to the current pandemic and how people are responding very briefly. And what am I learning from this entire experience is what I'm going to share, and open to discussions and interactions post. In my understanding, any CEO or board from a CHRO has three very clear expectations, which is top of the mind or makes them lose their sleep at night, which is, do we have the right talent? Does the organization have the right employer branding to acquire the right talent if we don't have? Are we doing enough to develop this talent? And are we having the right culture that this talent is retained and they grow with the organization? So talent acquisition, development, retention becomes probably one of the topmost agenda that the CHRO needs to drive. Now, to drive this, there are a couple of building blocks, because if you don't work on those building blocks, delivering on these becomes difficult. And these are culture and employer branding, organization development, ability of HR to partner with the business, and is HR, along with the rest of the organization, the CXOs and the CEO and the promoters, working towards making the organization future ready. So these are the four building blocks on which the fundamental working of the HR organization resides. I'll take each of these blocks in the sequential order and walk you through some of my experience and challenges and responses. In most of the organizations that I worked, it used to be a multi-generational workforce. And in a multi-generational workforce, there's a lot of heritage and legacy. Now, one has to be very careful that the legacy is heritage and not baggage. So my response has always been that, especially in an organization where you've got the baby boomers, the Gen Z, and the Gen X and Gen Y. So when you're a multi-generational workforce, getting to put together a team to work together has its challenges. So while mentoring is always something we say, but one of the things we tried in Dabur especially was reverse mentoring. When I say reverse mentoring, like for example, when we're putting up our e-commerce division, the sales head was a person in his mid-50s, been with the organization for long, tenured employee, tremendous amount of tacit and experiential knowledge. But the e-commerce division was headed by a 35-year-old person, a millennial, who had worked in Snapdeal and was worked with Amazon in the Middle East. Because we realized that while the national sales head had the overall business understanding and commercial understanding and the process understanding, e-commerce and the whole game of e-commerce and how consumers buy, how they interact, the role of analytics, the role of many other things which go into making an e-commerce experience. We need someone from the domain expertise, and we got this person. Secondly, when you have a lot of tenured employees, especially in a place like Dabur, or even I'm sure Amul would require during early days of iShip, and the promoters used to run the company, and the company decides to professionalize. A lot of the tenured employees feel a bit sidelined. They keep talking about the good old days when I used to deal with the promoters directly, almost trying to say that you professionals who come in between have become a pain for us. So they won't say that in as many words, but that's what they mean. So it was very important to kind of tell them that, look, we respect the past, we respect the heritage, we respect your tacit knowledge, we respect your experience. But we cannot be stuck in that. We need to move on, we need to learn new ways, we need to work in a way that takes the organization forward, building on the heritage of the past. Second was, in a very strong performance-driven organization, which is publicly listed, doing very well, stock market doing well, stock price doing well, CXOs become very powerful. And CXOs, not only are they powerful, they also almost form a cult following among themselves. So many times it becomes very difficult in a management committee or executive team meeting that the CEOs tend to spend a lot of time getting alignment with the CXOs. So a lot of the discussion tends to get inwardly focused. So one of the things I tried was that after aligning my CEO, I created a group called Huddle. It was only the CXOs without the CEO. And the whole focus of that interaction used to be, how do we focus on the consumer? How do we focus on the business? And how do we focus on KRAs beyond our individual functional KRAs? So that when we meet in executive team meetings, the focus is on the business and the consumer issues and not, kind of a power struggle on which the time goes. And we have an outside-in perspective. And one of the outcome of that was that we agreed that apart from the individual KRAs, there will be something called shared goals. Shared goals will be those goals which affect the entire organization in totality. Like, for example, gross margin, or maybe, the amount of write-off I do in terms of RM, raw material, packaging material, finished goods, damages, or the amount of cost I'm incurring indirect overheads as percentage of sales. So all these kind of shared goals became part of the variable pay component. So almost 10 to 15% of variable pay for general managers and above used to be shared goals which affected the entire organization. Okay. The third dimension was what I realized when you create an employer branding, the company's brand and the company's imagery in the mind of people becomes very important. Those people could be your consumers, those people could be your employees, future employees. Like, for example, Eicher used to struggle with this imagery. That's a tractor company. While we had bought out Royal Enfield, it was an iconic brand. Bullet was a brand we owned. We used to make trucks with the help of Mitsubishi called Canter. But people still believed that we are a tractor company. Xerox, I think, lived and died trying to wash away the image of a copier company. While it had a lot of network products, it had a first to launch the laser printer, first to launch the graphic user interface. But, people still think it's a copier company. Whirlpool entered India by acquiring Kelvinator, so it came to be known as a refrigerator company. Dabur, after so many years, we have a 1,200 crore portfolio in juices with the name of Real Brand. We are the largest branded honey maker with a 700 crore honey brand. A hair oil brand in Amla, which is a 800 crore brand, but still Dabur is a Chyawanprash company. So a lot of work needs to be done with corporate communications and other people in the senior management who are visible in the media to correct these brand perceptions. So Eicher recorrected itself that we are about energy in motion. Or it was written in a way it meant emotion, because Eicher was also about people. Xerox, they said we are not a copier company, we are a document company. And document can be in copies, it could be in prints, and documents carry knowledge, explicit knowledge. So from a document company, we are becoming a knowledge company. Whirlpool did aggressive communication because they were the first to launch microwaves in the country. Really spearheaded the movement, worked with homemakers to say it doesn't take off the nutritional value of your food, empaneled nutritionists on the company's roles, worked on service as a USP. And Dabur kept on repositioning itself that our vision statement is dedicated to the health and wellness of every household. And during the COVID period, we dialed up with vision statement very majorly, because the only thing that the consumer was worried about was health and wellness. So you need to be very conscious about how consumers and the future employees perceive you when you start building your brand, employer branding. Last, a very common question, whether you go to a campus or you look at a new employee on the interview table, when you say, is there anything you want to ask? They say, how do you describe the culture of your organization? So it's very important that employees, especially people who have a larger share of voice at the CXO levels and head of department levels, they uniformly articulate the culture of an organization in unambiguous terms. So Eicher was all about, it was an employee-driven culture. Employees were very important. Xerox prided as a high-performing sales organization. And as Amal said, very high on training and sales training. Whirlpool repositioned itself as a brand you can trust, because most people in those days would sell an appliance, but the after-sales service would suck. So they repositioned themselves that we provide you the best after-sales service, and the relationship is not over once you sell an appliance. And Dabur, we said that, look, we are a company which has been in business for 135 years. We have a lot of heritage. But we compete with the MNCs, the big boys like the HUL and the PNGs and Nestlé of the world. So we are an entrepreneurial organization. We have the strength of a tenured organization, but we work with the mindset of an entrepreneurial organization or a startup. So that was on culture and employer branding. The next bucket that I would like to move towards is organization development, a very key component according to me. Typically in most organizations, the bench strength that you have is something which never gets discussed. You'll have people in the appraisal cycles coming and telling, what about my promotion? What about my role expansion? What about my role enlargement? But you ask them, whom have you developed to take over from you? You get a deafening silence as an answer. So one of the conversations we started doing was that, look, especially among CXO -1, CXO -2 levels, if you are so concerned about your growth and your next level, please also tell us whom are you developing to take over from you. And that brought us to the whole concept of succession planning and what GE developed as the 9-box performance potential grid. That was a very sacrosanct assessment we used to do along with the management committee, where every CXO used to first input for his function. And used to very clearly look at what is the talent we have. If tomorrow I have to transfer that talent or the talent leaves, do I have adequate bench strength to fill that role? Or classically in a sales system, if I have taken a management trainee or an MBA from a premier B school, and he's now an area sales manager with 1 or 2 years experience, does he look like a regional head 6 years down the line? Can he move from a ZSM to an RH? So whether the guy is two levels promotable, 1 level promotable, it's quite possible that some people are not promotable, like in domain expertise roles. Like for in R&D, we had a person who was a hair oil specialist. The whole nation knew that he was the best hair oil guy you had. I mean, he may not become an R&D head, that's perfectly okay. As long as I know that he's in the organization for a particular reason, he may not become the head of R&D, but he has a domain expertise and I value that expertise. The second challenge we used to have was, Dabur used to have this problem of, we used to get lateral hires, but the lateral hires never used to stay beyond 3 to 5 years. So how do you build robustness in your leadership? So we worked with the Hay Group, which has now been acquired by Conferry. And we defined, along with the CEO and the top 35 leaders, what are the critical success factors and competencies to be successful in Dabur. We did focus group discussions. We did everything that we could to, distill out those competencies. And we took about 100 people through what is called a Making Great Leaders program, which the company never had a background of having done 360-degree feedback. So we developed a culture, talked to people that what is 360 about, told raters that 360 is not an opportunity to get square up with your boss or give him some blunt feedback because you have an anonymous pen in your hand. It is for his development initiative. And so on the competency framework, we did 360 on the leadership style. We did 360 and gave people 1 year time with the Hay consultants to develop and work on their leadership development journey and reassess them, and people who improved their scores were recognized. So that kind of set the tone that what is leadership assessment, what is leadership competency, how are you going to be assessed in this organization? And these leadership competencies also became part of the performance management system during the appraisal cycle. The third important dimension was learning and development. I mean, about 16, 15 years, there's too much mindset on instructor-led and classroom training, while the world was slowly moving towards e-learning. So what we did 2 things out here. We first made it very clear that we are going from training to learning, and the onus on learning will be on the employee. The organization will create resources for you to learn. We moved from instructor-led training to gamified e-learning. We partnered with a startup called Mindtickle, which was run by IIM, IIT grads, all in their late 20s, early 30s. And they gave us a platform. We developed the content along with the line function, and we did that. Career moments and promotions were not just what the CXO or the HOD decides. We put together a career development center process along with, again, another HR consulting firm. And for every role, an elevation framework was developed, assessment used to happen on that. And the end, there used to be a behavioral interview, which was done by an unbiased panel, where the concerned person getting considered for promotion, his boss or his CXO will not be part of the panel. And so it's an unbiased assessment. And so it brought in a lot of transparency, predictiveness, science, and a logic of why somebody is getting promoted, why somebody is not getting promoted. And if somebody doesn't get promoted, what is the way forward for it? We also introduced executive coaching in a very big way for people at GM and above cadres. People who were seen as future CXOs were put together through global Ivy League programs, like the Kellogg Global Advanced Management Program was a mandatory program for anyone who is likely to become a CXO going forward. The third bucket I would take is the role of HR as a business partner. I think it's one of the very crucial roles that HR has to play. support functions like HR, finance, etc., tend to be relegated as staff functions or support functions. But I think those days are gone. And I'll just give you some examples. Like around 2000, about 8-10 years back, we acquired a Bombay-based company, Balsara. And the reason for acquisition was that we were getting into home care category and very powerful brands like Odomos and Sanifresh and things like that. So the very critical component out here in the acquisition was we need to retain talent, the talent which made this company and the brand what it was. But my experience of having worked in Modi's Rocks, where we were acquired by Xerox Corporation, and having joined Whirlpool, where Whirlpool had acquired Kelvinator. So we put together some very clear issues of what we should not be doing to mess up this acquisition. First was no big bully behavior. Typically in acquisition, what happens is the acquired company feels that the acquiring company is not treating me fair. They're talking down at me. They're not being transparent about things. So we very clearly said from day one, there were town hall meetings where they were called, total transparency on they had a different hierarchical structure, they had a different layered structure, how their layer going to fit into the main system, career plans, transparency on comp and ben. So that, they feel that they're valued for what they and they're not looking for jobs the moment the acquisition has taken place. Second was we got into a new business venture of beauty retail. Those of you who are in Gurgaon or this thing, we got a brand of stores called New You. I don't know how many of you may have seen that. It's very similar to a Watson store in Singapore or a kind of a Boots store. So we were getting into beauty cosmetic retail, and the parent company did not have any experience around it. And talent attraction was a big challenge because Dabur was known as an FMCG company, but direct B2C selling through a retail outlet was something we are not known for. And we had two painful CEO transitions that the CEO had been asked to leave. So in the beginning, the first thing we did was we benchmarked other retail companies on how they are structured. They didn't go through the consultant route to begin with. We used interviews as insight mining opportunities. We quickly hired the CEO's first line from retail organizations and used their network to hire talent. And I was lucky that in the midst of two CEO transitions, the Dabur Global CEO actually asked me to play the role of an interim business head to run the business. And when I asked him that I don't have an experience, he said that, look, you've been in the company you've been with this business from day one, you hired all people. I want you to do two things: ensure that no talent leaves us because CEOs have left. And secondly, we don't take any wrong decisions and see how best we can turn around the business. In this, I mean, we closed unviable stores. I opened new stores. And I was able to learn so much about the business that even after the new CEO joined, I used to be a member of the core team, which used to clear store opening proposals. Without my clearance, the global CEO never used to approve those stores. So that is what, working in business as an HR person does to you. It totally opens your mind to a very different dimension to the business. When you're setting up the e-commerce business, earlier we had our own strategy consulting partner running that entire e-commerce show for us, but they were very expensive. The CEO felt that we should build our own competency. So we again benchmarked the structures of other organizations. We mapped key talent because my own e-commerce people knew that when they go for a discussion to an Amazon or a Big Basket or a Flipkart, who are the other company guys who are sitting there. So they knew what is the talent in the market. And we ensured that there's a very clear understanding of the baton handing over from the consultant when we start doing our own organization. So we first took up all the operational work and then eventually the strategic work. We worked out the entire P&L because for some time the consultant would also continue and we would have our own talent also. So how does the P&L look like? How does the margins of the business look like? We did all that. And we targeted the talent in the market. We targeted durable companies who always wanted to come to FMCG. We targeted tier 2 e-commerce companies like Snapdeal or Paytm, which was winding up their marketplace. So did very strategic targeting of talent. And the very important dimension here was gender diversity. Because in an FMCG company where 80-85% of your business comes from what is called general trade or fragmented sales, sales used to have very high discomfort in having women sales managers. The typical issue used to be, look, there's a safety issue, it's a feet on street job, 15 days of traveling in the market, living out of hotels. I'm not comfortable. Tomorrow I have a moral responsibility towards that lady. So what we did was that we said, let's move away, let's stop measuring matrices for some time. Let's not look at percentage of women as managers, percentage of women in the total employee base. Metrics don't give us any result. Let's look at business connect. So we worked with the CXO for sales and marketing. We identified roles where women's safety will not be an issue. For example, if you have been an account manager for a Reliance Retail or a Big Bazaar, that is dealing with people who are professional, urban-centric roles. We identified cities which are safe for women, like Pune, Bangalore, Chennai, Chandigarh, those kind of cities. So once we broke the sales mindset on hiring women, then we went whole hog to other functions like finance, to R&D, to marketing, to HR, where women talent was abundantly available. So the crux here was, we said we are not going to track gender diversity as a metric, but as a connect to business. Finally, there was a big ticket item on future readiness. Future readiness was about India as a young country. We have a demographic dividend. We have a lot of Gen X and Gen Y. Even a company like Dabur, which has a lot of tenured employees, we had 60% people from Gen X and Gen Y. But a Gen X, Gen Y, or a millennial, centennial kind of person who's technologically savvy, lives a digital lifestyle, if we are not relevant to him going forward, then we are not going to win the war for talent, as McKinsey calls it. If you want to win the war for talent going forward, your organization needs to be relevant to this Gen Y, Gen Z. We can hate them, we can criticize them, but at the end of the day, they're going to be our consumers or employees, whether we like it or not. So how do you make your organization Gen Y, Gen Z relevant? I mean, just to give a very quick, McKinsey defines the Gen Y, Gen Z, Gen X, Gen B in this way. I mean, the various characteristics I've given. Gen Y are typically people who are born in the early 80s and up to say 94. They're basically people who question a lot. The what's in it for me syndrome is very high. The Gen Z are people who are born after 95, people in their early to mid 20s, who dialogue a lot, who are high on social networking. They're digital natives. Gen X are people, many of us probably here are probably Gen X, who were born in a capitalistic era. For us, materialistic status symbols are very important, may not be for all. I'm sorry if I'm not wanting to be specific here, but there's a general behavior of these people. So how are you going to make the organization Gen Y, Gen Z ready? And we realized that the only way we can do that is we have to make the organization a network digital ecosystem where the millennial will be comfortable with the kind of digital lifestyle they live. And what better to start with the HR function, because that is the first interface point for a young talent coming from the market or from the campus. And we embarked on, Ramco was our technology partner. We launched this digital HR on the go, where the whole idea was we'll move to employee self-service. HR will stop answering to people's queries on mails and calls. The whole thing was to become less central, less bureaucratic. Workflows which can operate either on your, totally it was device agnostic. You could have an iPhone, you can have an Android, an operating system, whatever, or a tab. Everything is on a very intuitive, high user experience interface workflows. The idea was to put a lot of data and analytics in the hands of line managers and HODs so that they can mine data themselves and take out insights rather than HR being a controller and disseminator of information. We implemented platforms like Tableau for data visualization. So the idea was to create a faster organization which communicates better, collaborates better, and co-creates better and decides faster, and which creates a more engaged organization. Just a visual depiction. This was the Ramco chatbot called Chia. You could become friends with Chia using a Facebook Messenger or a WhatsApp. You could just message to Chia saying what is my leave balance or how much money is left in my petrol reimbursement. You don't even have to type a mail. Chia, it uses machine language and natural language processing, AI cognitive technologies. It will learn over a period of time. It's answering your questions. So a lot of the people who are only into operational query management roles will be deployed in better roles. Just a visual depiction that it could work on a tab globally. Say the CFO or a CHRO could see what is the payroll status in across any country. You don't even have to log into your system. You had a mail it feature. Somebody sends an approval for a mail. You just say, okay, using natural language processing, the system can understand. You can do it on your mobile through an app. So the idea was to totally transform the whole HR experience into a digital experience for the organization, make it a leaner, faster, agile organization. Now, coming to the portion now where, where we are all recovering from and we are all rebooting ourselves. We have understood that COVID is going to stay in some form or the other till the vaccine is found. We have found ways of dealing with it. The economy is slowly opening up. People are coming to terms with the reality. And as we reboot and reimagine, I think there are 4 dimensions which become very critical as we go. It's going to be recovering the revenue that has been lost in the first quarter, rethinking the supply chain, reimagining the future organization, and how are you going to reform using digital technologies. So consumer behavior has changed a lot. I mean, people are shopping more on e-commerce, including staples like wheat and pulses. People have become very health and hygiene conscious. So there is more buying of immunity building things and surface cleaning and sanitizers and things like that. There's a lot of fear on, say, due to social distancing and the touch. So organization will have to create processes which are no touch or low touch. So the entire value chain will have to move into digital invoicing and digital payment system, because in the consumer space, even now, you have physical invoices floating around, post-dated checks floating around. All that digital transformation will have to work towards making it a very no-touch, low-touch ecosystem. Telemedicine is going to be a huge area going forward. The government of India in March 2020 launched the India telemedicine policy. Telemedicine was not technically legal in India very clearly till that time. A lot of work startups are doing on home diagnostics. So for example, if you have, a lot of people are worried about going and seeing a doctor for OPD treatment to a Max or a Fortis or a Apollo. So what are startups working on? They're basically working on that your laptop becomes a diagnostic thing. They're working on your BP machine being connectable to your laptop, your sugar testing machine being connected to your laptop, your digital thermometer being connected to your laptop, whether through Bluetooth or through the USB port. You connect to a Max doctor through your Aadhaar card and your OTP you connect. So, and through face recognition, the doctor knows that you are the right Krishnan and not an imposter. I know that if I'm talking to Dr. Amal Das, I'm talking to right Dr. Amal Das and not someone else. So all that is done. Your entire data is already on the system. The doctor knows he can converse with you. At least basic level of OPD treatment is majorly trying to move towards home diagnostics. And that is one huge area of explosion likely to witness. Advertising and communication will have to be responsible. A lot of people are trying to ride the fear of, showing a homemaker trying to, dust a dining table and suddenly a corona kind of a virus jumps on her hand. So these kind of irresponsible those brands were trolled. You need to be genuine in these times. You need to be empathetic. And how you communicate is going to be very important. You have to rethink the supply chain in a big way. Organizations realize that dependence on migrant labor is going to be a huge issue going forward. So very high level of automation and dependence on labor is being worked upon. Faster speed to market and new product introduction will be the order of the day. So manufacturing technologies will move more towards additive manufacturing like 3P, like 3D printers and things like that. The connected manufacturing is a big thing which is happening in a big way, because organizations buy a lot of high-end equipment and depend on annual maintenance contracts. But there are companies like Allen Bradley and the Toshiba and Hitachi who are now helping you connect all your machines in the shop floor, have a central diagnostic system, and using a virtual reality, help your own maintenance team troubleshoot the whole thing. So that is because it's all driven by not wanting more and more outsiders inside your plant. And a lot of creative collaboration with third-party small manufacturers in the small and medium sector will happen, because they are having excess capacity, they don't have enough work. So, but many of them have capacities. So instead of putting your own capex, you could collaborate creatively with them. A lot of interesting delivery mechanisms started, like a lot of people collaborated with Zomato and Swiggy for last mile delivery. We collaborated with one of the truck aggregating companies because our stockists were not able to move their tempos to move stuff from the stockists go down to the retail outlet. So many of these creative things will have to continue going forward because they are faster and cheaper. The organizational future will have to be majorly reimagined. because in the whole COVID scenario, what we were doing was we're cutting through layers of the organization. We were in the calls, there will be 70, 80 people. The area sales manager and the front line was battling it out, used to be on the call. So we have moved from a pyramid structure to an amphitheater mindset with the customer at the center. That mindset should not change. That brings in agility, that brings in speed to the market. The COVID also told us that a lot of roles and layers in the organization are redundant. So we need to retrain, upskill people, re-employ them. And if it's still not possible, we have to empathetically kind of handle the redundancy, because at the end of the day, we have to make a very agile organization. We'll have to create a culture of a startup with the strengths of an incumbent player. And a lot of focus will have to be there on health and well-being, because people are still worried about coming to physical offices. Work from home, especially at junior levels, was a challenge. A lot of the people at staff levels who used to stay in small, 2 BHK apartments with a wife, 2 kids, a dependent parent, they didn't have the proper ecosystem to work from home. Many of them didn't have laptops and PCs. So organization policies will have to be relooked at. Maybe we'll have to help them buy their own devices. And some of these things will have to be seen. And this was something that's floating around during the COVID time, that who is leading the digital transformation company? And the obvious answer was COVID-19. So a lot of reforming and relooking at the organization processes and new businesses using digital will be the order of the day. And the organization will have to skill and train and acquire talent accordingly. So finally, what I would say is that my learning from all this has been that the key role of HR has to be leading successful change management. In all my life, what I've seen is one has always been trying to handle some change management or the other. And change management is where the cookie crumbles, because as per neuro-linguistic professionals, the human brain is wired to see change as a threat. And that is why change management becomes even more difficult. And the key enablers to transformational change is you should have clarity. What are you changing? Why are you changing? How do you intend going about it? Collaboration with the stakeholders, your CEO, your CXOs, your CEOs, your promoters, if they are involved, so that their buy-in is there. Whatever you want to change and implement, the implementers, they should be involved in co-creating the change. And people who are affected should be very clearly communicated as to why this change is happening and how it will benefit. And finally, you should have a very clear charter in terms of roadmap, timelines, champions, review process, and resources. Where you have a consultant like an XPM to help them out or somebody else. So digital transformation could be a driver for change, because a lot of organizations are looking at that as an opportunity to drive change. And business understanding, especially of functions like HR, finance, etc., is an imperative to lead change. If you don't understand business, you don't get either the seat or the voice on the table to drive change. And lastly, as Marshall Goldsmith, one of the very renowned executive coach and thought leader, says, why is change management difficult? Because there is no change in the comfort zone, and people don't want to leave the comfort zone. And there's no comfort in the change zone. So this is what makes change management difficult. And if you're able to master this, then a lot of transformational work can be done in organizations. So I would end my, whatever I had to share at this point of time, and happy that you people heard me through, and happy to engage now on any interactions where I could increase my perspective further.
Thank you, Krishnan. Yeah, yes, it was a really panoramic view of the experience that you have had, and you brought it up to speed. That's what it is. And there are some questions which are coming up now. So, Aniljeet, you had a question, a couple of questions.
Yeah.
You said.
Yes. Very nice presentation, Mr. Krishnan. It's exactly the kind of systems, processes, and the visioning that a stable, well-run organization has in terms of HR. Today's standards, are changing, and we are a consultancy organization. My question was maybe a little more specific. Suppose, we go into an organization which is about 300-400 people, 400-500 crores, and they have been a traditional organization. And post-COVID, they need to change. This would include, things like reducing costs, obviously, and creating a better competitive advantage. So from an HR perspective, you go in, and what were some of the key things you would look at to create a new strategy of HR for the organization, where interestingly, HR itself may either not exist or be only a person. So how would you look at that?
Mr. Aniljeet, I would start first from the business. I would look at what is the revenue streams of this company. What are the product lines which have been delivering revenue for them? What is the competitive landscape? And who are their customers? And what is their cost base? Like, for example, at the end of the day, in any organization or business, very simple: revenue minus cost is equal to profit. And most of the small and medium enterprises are struggling with survival because their profitability is at stake. So if their revenue has been hit, it has been hit because of what? Because of lack of consumption or because of competitive dynamics. And if their cost pressures are still that high, for the level of revenue they're generating, do they still have to run with that cost base? Or is there a way of optimizing the cost base, either not necessarily by right-sizing people? Maybe you can put some people in consulting roles, or some people could be on this thing. So I would look at it purely from a P&L point of view to begin with, understand the levers of the business, then come down to issues like process, people, etc., and then figure out as to what needs to be, if there's a scope for upskilling and training people to come up to the new challenges. One can look at that. If that is not there, you have to get in people at an interim position at a short term, because if you work in a crisis, a training may not be the best solution. You may have to probably import competence and capability at a very war footing. So I would begin with business and then drill down to the various functions and how they are positioned to take this business out of the stress and grow, and look at the cost base, look at the capabilities. That's how I would approach it.
So follow-up question would be that, assuming that there were certain processes that would be absolutely necessary for an organization even going forward, which would be the few processes you would retain out in the HR system, and which are some of the processes you may be able to do away with because that's not going to be critical going forward?
Like, if you're talking about a 400-500 people organization with that kind of a turnover, I mean, my experience with most of these organizations, with many of our vendors in Dabur, used to be of this size. So many of them run more of a personnel department, and they don't. There's somebody just handling the payroll, statutory compliances, and the bare essential required to run. So obviously things like payroll and compliances, if they have a factory environment, all those need to be retained, because governance is a fundamental bare minimum that you need to keep. Second, I would look at what is their talent acquisition and development strategy. Do they have one or do they don't have? Because the point is that in this post-COVID era, a lot of talent has either become redundant, they're not required, or they need rapid upskilling. Okay, so who has the visibility on the capability and the competence of the various people in different functions? Who are the must-have talent, and who are the people who can be either let go, or if you find something and go, it is not a regrettable loss. So that visibility on the talent pool should be very clearly there. And a very clear view as to, because typically when you start engaging with proprietary firms, when you ask them about, they don't have a very clear view as to which is a talent which they need to retain, which is critical, and which talent can be dispensed with. Because their style of operation is highly relationship oriented, and a lot of emphasis given on past relationship loyalty. While I agree one has to give credibility to that, one needs to respect that, but that cannot be the driving force when you're working on a crisis mode of trying to grow and survive the organization.
Yeah,
Great.
Thank you.
Ranjit, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Aman.
Yes, Ranjit.
Thank you, Krishnan. Now, Krishnan, you are now sort of a free agent, right? You have you decided to become a consultant, and I think you are also open to interim roles where you might parachute into organizations and take on interim roles. Is that my understanding correct?
Yeah, whatever we discussed, Ranjit, with you and Amal last, I think, yeah, we
Right.
kind of agreed to that. Yeah.
Right. And we're considering having you be, part of our team, in the sense having you come on board as a senior consultant, and that's something we're going to be deciding in a few days, and we really appreciate your interest, and I hope we'll be able to move forward on that. So my question is that we found, do you think, do you think that HR, directors in India appreciate this concept? Because you seem to appreciate it, but do other HR directors appreciate this concept? And do you think, what role do you think it plays in some of the things that you discussed today, the kinds of processes that you described today? So what role would interim management, or deploying interim managers, so for short-term assignments, for projects, or for crises, or for just discontinuities, what role do you see the interim managers playing? Because we have a talent pool. I'm just curious, how do you think they'll be deployed in the future?
Ranjit, in whatever the forums I've attended and some of the conferences that I've been to in the past, I think in most of the evolved organizations, CHROs today understand that they have a business partnering role to do. I mean, their role is beyond compliances and payroll management and recruitment management and things like that, because the ecosystem has become too dynamic and too volatile to be playing a very passive staff role, because nobody has the time and the patience for that at this point of time. And I think most of the large organizations which have complex businesses and challenges have pretty competent CHROs, is what I've seen. But it is the challenges more, I would say, in the medium to the medium to large kind of window, where maybe their ability to attract good HR talent is also limited by what they're able to attract as a brand, and what they're able to offer as a role, and what they're able to offer as a compensation. So I think that has become the limiting factor. But having said that, I think today there is a lot of awareness that HR is no longer just human resource management or personnel management and compliance management. I think that's fairly clear to a lot of people, in my view.
Right. So I was actually talking about interim managers, the people who come in for short-term assignments. Do you see them as being part of a solution? As opposed to permanent roles, where you have people who are in the organization on a permanent basis. Are HR directors or CHROs, are they open to the? You seem to be open to it, but would your community of CHROs be open to this concept? Because most of our clients are CEOs and board level. We're trying to understand, should we be talking to CHROs also?
Look, it depends on, I think, to answer the question, in an interim management role, there is definitely a role, because the one thing that an interim manager or does it, they bring an external outside-in perspective, which a person inside the organization may not always be having the full visibility on. And I think in a lot of areas where CHROs typically find a challenge is that are they really having their button in the fingers on the right hot buttons on the organizational dashboard? Because so what an interim CHRO can do is to help the CHRO keeping the business context in mind and the challenges in mind and the deliverables in mind and the consumer expectations. You know, what should be on its dashboard? What is the critical items on its dashboard that you should be monitoring and working towards? I think most CHROs either because they lose perspective or they get lost in their operational deliverables and lose perspective. And they can be coached and handheld in getting that. And I think that's very much possible, which a lot of CHROs would find it useful, is my feeling.
Yeah, Ranjit, you say just want to take off from what Ranjit said, Krishnan, is we find that when we are talking to the entrepreneurs, you know, and people who are driving the business as a business head, their understanding and appreciation as far as the interim is concerned is very, very, very fast. And they are able to come out with areas that this is where we require, you know, those are there. When we go to HR, you know, there are HR people and HR people, you know, there are different type of people. But generally we found that the appreciation for having interims as such, you have to spend a lot of time in trying to convince that part. Where you see, I'll just tell you, the biggest haven of the interims is the biggest businesses of all times, that is the Ambani Group. Okay? They understand that, look, it is the interims who make the difference. Hire the talent, get the job done, get people trained under them, and move on. You know, that's what it is. Even the managing director of Reliance Jio, he was an interim, you know. So that's the way in which, you know, large businesses and all do that. Ranjit's question is more in the backdrop of that, when we go and talk to some of the HR people, how do you feel? Even because you have been, you know, leading organizations in the HR sphere, how receptive are they towards this concept?
They will not.
Ranjit,
I got a question. Look, let me tell you, a classical CHRO will not be receptive to this idea because they see that as a threat perception. So when you're selling an interim role, I think the first thing to be done is you need to take the threat perception away from the intervention. I think it needs to be clarified to the incumbent CHRO or the HR head that, look, the interim person is here more as a who is more of a domain knowledge or subject matter expertise for a very defined time. It is not to snatch away any credit from you. Whatever happens, because even when you hire consultants in an organization, the moment they start dabbling in the HR space, I find that the HR organization is the last to be open to a consultant walking into their space. There's an Aon Hewitt or an Accenture, because somewhere HR people tend to be very tough oriented when they're this thing. There are two things. One is tough orientation. Second, there is a belief and a fear that I handle a lot of sensitive data. You know, there is payroll data, there is compensation data, there is PMS data, and so how can I share with a rank outsider? So I think if you're able to position it as in a non-threatening way, and not trying to, tomorrow he should not wonder that 4 months down the line whether I'm going to have a job or not. He started looking for a job because there's an interim CHRO who has come. I think as long as you're able to manage the threat perception, clarify to him how this entire transition will happen and how he will be in a better position to run the show once the transition window is over, I think he'll be more receptive. He or she will be more receptive.
All right. Thank you. Shamendra, I think you had a question.
Yeah. Let me also come. Yeah. Hi, Krishnan. Very high-level presentation from a HR professional. And you brought in so many things which a typical HR guy is not very involved with, in terms of linkages with the business and digital strategy for HR systems and things like that. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Mr. Narayan.
My question is that, you know, the last 2 years, as we have all seen in this country, the big companies are getting bigger, and the smaller ones or the mid-sized ones are either going to become bigger from whatever they were, or they will go away. It all has happened because of GST, cash being sent out of the system, and now the mother of all the reasons, the COVID, right? Now, in a situation like this, obviously, if you look at the smaller companies, what do they lack? They don't have the right talent, right? So they have some legacy talent, or the entrepreneur himself said, oh my God, I know everything. I'm the one who brought it to this level, so I don't need anybody else, right? He cannot hire best talent in the market because of the cost, right? And nobody will, I mean, either cost or the brand equity, both, nobody will go. So a situation, in this situation, a solution like interim managers, which is what, we've been talking about, can be a great solution for them, because, they get a very high level of talent for a small window, get things done and gets out, and then the rest of the team can run it. It's like, in a day-to-day running of the business, you're not trying to solve the most difficult problem. The most difficult problem, a very senior level talent can come, solve it, and then run of the mill things, running the organization, everybody else can do. So, I mean, I'm giving you my perspective, and I want your reaction, because, from you have now run businesses, you've been CHROs in different kind of companies. I mean, even Dabur, for example, one time it must have been a family managed business, but they transitioned so well. So what do you think about this? I mean, can interim managers be a great boon for these companies which are facing the threat of either, going under, or actually get the chance of becoming very, very big and survive?
Mr. Narayan, I think there are multiple aspects to this question. I mean, first of all, if it's an entrepreneurial-driven organization, actually promoter-driven, and struggling to scale up in this post-COVID era and things like that, putting an interim manager may help them. But what I would look at is that once an interim manager leaves, I mean, obviously when he's interim, he's not going to be there lifelong. So what are the building blocks you want to put in place so that it is sustainable once the interim arrangement goes away? And whether whatever building blocks you're putting in for sustainability, is the promoter, of his own volition, accepting to bring about those changes and continue with those changes, or is going to go back to the old ways of running the business once the interim person goes away? So that is one fundamental question to be asked. And because any kind of transition, because I've seen transitioning from a promoter business to a professional run business, it takes a lot for a promoter to step back, have patience, empower the professional managers to run. Like in Dabur's own experience, the first round of professional management was a disaster. It was absolute disaster. Okay. And, but they had the guts to go through with it. The second I would say is, there are multiple models. Now, let me give you an example. All of you would have heard about this Ayurvedic company called Baidyanath.
Yes.
Compared to Dabur's scale and size, Baidyanath is probably nothing. Okay. They sell Ayurvedic medicines. We also sell Ayurvedic medicines. Their identification begins and ends with Ayurvedic medicines. Okay. Now, let me tell you, one of the third generation Baidyanath family members, one of the young Sharmas, he has moved away from the Baidyanath umbrella, has put up a health and Ayurvedic healthcare food business by the name of Kapiva, Kapivh, Kapiva, which is funded by Fireside Ventures, which is a PE funded partner. And it is a 100 crore business in about a year's time. Nobody knows. So what he has done, he has moved away from the Baidyanath tag, because he knows that Baidyanath tag is not going to help him in this. He's tied up with a PE partner. And the Baidyanath family has allowed him to run that business independently without the, without the baggage and the legacy of that brand, while they're funding him and helping him at the back end.
Yeah.
So there are multiple ways of doing it. The fundamental issue is, does the promoter have the courage to admit that, the way I've been running the business is not the right way. I need to do something drastically different. Does he have the humility to believe that I need to learn something new, and old ways are not going to, help go. What got me here is not going to get me there. And does he have the discipline to go through with that change process? If these three elements are not there, I would say attempting any change management is totally not worth it. In fact, the people trying to implement that change will get a bad.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Krishnan. There's one last question, the time that we have. Sushil, I think, I missed out on you. You had moved out, I guess.
No, I just logged out because of power.
Oh, I see. Yeah. No, please go ahead.
Thank you for taking us through a very strategic piece on HR transformation. It's a question more from your own next part of the career, where you have now looked at digital transformation skill set to be part of your next journey. How do you think that's going to pan out, and why has that been added as part of your portfolio of skills and services that you are going to make it available to the clients?
Look, Sushil, I got into digital in a big way because I very clearly saw that digital transformation is going to be a very big change agenda, and the way we, as consumers and as the way we run business, is going to come in a big way. I was lucky, and my organization gave me an opportunity to transform my HR organization in a digital way. And I was involved very deeply with my sales organization in some of their digital transformation initiatives. I got into digital transformation because of the passion for it. I knew that is something which is going to be there going forward, whether we like it or not. It's a subject matter of my interest. I don't claim to be a specialist in that, but I'm a fairly knowledgeable enthusiast in that. Let me put it that way. And I'm reasonably clear what are the areas where digital transformation will explode, and I'm tracking some of those areas very closely. I am in touch with people even overseas who are working on the cutting edge of digital transformation.
Okay.
Good. Thank you very much. And in fact, I think the sway of the entire presentation as well as the questions, I think we really understood the way in which you have shaped your career and impacted organizations wherever you have worked and all. And thank you, my fellow partners. And we look forward to Ranjit, we look forward to Krishnan coming back to us and then embarking on the great journey that we have thought. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Krishnan.
Thanks, Amal. Thanks for answering it. Thanks, Sita. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time. It was a pleasure interacting with you. A lot of these questions made me challenge my own thinking on a couple of things, and very interactive. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.